Last week, the Negroes were out there having some sort of Justice or Else march. I was too busy editing Spinsterella and doing the final edits on this book to even notice what was going on with this so called Justice or Else march. Now, this Justice or Else march is supposed to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the Million Man farce that transpired back in 1995. And as we remember, any of us who were around at that time, I was in my 20s at the time, and they talked about then how the Million Man farce was supposed to be an atonement for black men, and it was supposed to lead to change. Fast forward 20 years later, things have changed, but just not in the way the Negro expected. The homicide rate is still the hot number one cause of death among black men. The dropout rate now is at 70%. The unemployment rate is at 80%. And 73% of African Americans are born to single mothers. So, for a million black men marching to Washington, we didn't get much change out of the deal. So, I wonder, what is the purpose of another march? Negro has been marching on Washington how many times in the last 4 or 5 years? I mean, we had a march on Washington for Black Lives Matter. We had a march on Washington for Trayvon Martin. We had a march on Washington for Michael Brown. We had a march on Washington for Eric Garner. I think we had one for Sandra Bland. We've had more marches on Washington in the last couple of years than we've actually had Thanksgiving Day parades. Yet the Negro situation just does not change. And the sad part is the Negro still has not figured out that the definition of insanity is doing the exact same thing and expecting a different result. I mean, how many marches can you have before you eventually start taking a look at the bigger picture and saying, this just isn't working? I mean, I look at the big picture since the 1960s and the original March on Washington, and nothing has changed. In fact, things have gotten progressively worse when it comes down to this Afro American Negroes community. But the Negroes' only solution for things is to go out and march on Washington. When what's really insane about it is, what type of attention are you going to get? Everybody is usually not in their political offices on Saturday. So a bunch of you guys going out there to march on Washington on a Saturday when all the offices are closed and no one's going to be really paying any attention really has no impact. And this is what really annoys me about all these so-called marches. They usually happen on a Saturday. Most of the politicians aren't in office. Most of the people aren't at work. And they have negligible, next to no impact long term on anything. And when I look at this big picture, you know, I say to myself, how is doing the exact same thing lead to a different result? People keep talking about change, yet they continue to do the exact same things over and over again. Marching, protesting, rallying. I mean, if you were a really smart black person, you know what? You would just get yourself a hot dog stand, a cooler with some water in it, and whatever they had this rally, you would just be standing outside selling these Negroes hot dogs and bottled water, and that's the best way to make some money off of these Negroes. But these Negroes, they go there, they get all emotional, they get all riled up, and they're listening to the fire and the rhetoric and all this stuff. And what happens to this Negro a couple days later? Negro goes right back to participating in the same dysfunctional behaviors they were continuing, they had participated in before. The homicides of each other, the having children out of wedlock, the um, constant ignoring of black-owned businesses, and yet these Negroes will sit there and say they want change. Again, you go to the rally, you listen to the rhetoric, you listen to these guys talk about change, but it doesn't seem like any of the messages that many of these pro-blacks or any of these black activists say to you seems to resonate, because a couple days later, Pookie is still shooting Ray Ray. Bobo is still shooting Shinebone. Bonquisha and Lanisha are still fighting at the McDonald's. And you guys make the promise to atone and do better, yet you go back to doing the same behaviors you did before, participate in the same dysfunctional behaviors you said before. So, for all the marching and protesting, it has about as much impact as a drop of water in on the ground. It has no impact whatsoever. Just really, it doesn't feel anything. But these Negroes think that they have gone out and accomplished something. And you look at it and you go, you've been marching and protesting, again, for over 25 years, and nothing has changed in your community. Yet you still continue to believe doing the exact same thing is eventually going to lead to a different result. And no one sits down and tells this Negro, this is insane. It's continuously insane to go out here and march and protest. Now, in my 20s, I looked at that Million Man farce and I said, this is ridiculous then. And I'm still looking at it now and saying, this is completely ridiculous. How do you continue to do the exact same thing generation after generation, still looking for things that just aren't going to happen? I mean, again, if you want change, it has to start with you. But you Negroes just don't want to put the effort in. You don't want to put the time in, and you don't put no commitment in. You just want to. You're still hoping to get to some promised land by just sitting there and waiting for stuff to magically happen. And it's just not going to happen that way, Negro. There is no promised land. You are already in the promised land, but you just don't want to put any hands in the ground to go out and go do some work to accomplish anything. So you keep going over to this so-called white supremacist government and begging them for crumbs when all the tools are right in front of the Negro, and they're right there for him to go out and build whatever he wants. But this Negro doesn't want to do that. No, he does not want to do that. He doesn't want to go out here and make any efforts to improve the quality of life in his own community. No, he'd just rather get on a bus, go march to Washington with his hat in hand, looking pathetic, looking sad, and then hoping somebody will come out with some block grants or some government programs and continue to try to give this Negro some crumbs from the table. Meanwhile, your activists like your Louis Farrakhan and your Nation of Islam are collecting their 10% right off the top because they asked for a bunch of money 20 years ago. Nobody knows where that money went. They probably got some more money this time. Nobody knows where that money went. And this Negro, sadly, he continues to do the exact same things. He expects different results. He expects change where there is no change inside of himself, and he never figures out that change starts with us and starts with ourselves, and that change is hard. This Negro just does not want to change. The whole thing is, the truth is, this Negro just doesn't want to change because he's a dependent class Negro, and dependent class Negroes need white folks as a scapegoat so that they can have someone to blame for their failures and continue to maintain their codependent relationship with, because they know as long as they can shame some white folks into giving them some crumbs from the table, they'll always be fed. Meanwhile, not knowing that if they learn the recipe for cake, they could make their own cakes, maybe start their own bakeries, and maybe even sell cakes to people all over the world. But Negro, again, just does not want to roll up their sleeves, just does not want to do their work. They would rather march to Washington rather than march themselves into a black-owned business or march themselves towards working towards a black-owned businesses in their own community. They would rather march on Washington than march themselves towards progress. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.